information and intelligence around global events. And now, here is your host, Rachel Marsden.
Hey everybody, welcome to the show. How you doing? We're about to get going. If you're just joining us, we're going to wait for a few more people to roll in, a few more seconds, and then we're going to blast off. Great show for you today. Can't wait to tell you about it. Right off the bat, we're going to talk about Ukraine, Joe Biden, conflicts of interest, Hunter Biden, that mysterious laptop from the last election that emerged, that 50 American intelligence officers, high ranking, some of them, denied even existed and called a Russian disinformation operation. But we have the details. And we're going to be joined by Marc Ruskin, a former FBI special agent with 5 citations from the FBI director. So somebody who's very credible. He's also going to talk about the influence of George Soros. You might know the name, might have come across it. Global reach with the Soros Foundation and various other charities, non-governmental organizations that he supports. We're going to talk about his influence on the U.S. justice system and the so-called democratic system of governance in the United States. Is it really as democratic as we think it is? So Marc Ruskin, former FBI special agent, is going to join us to talk about that today on the show in the next 12 minutes. First, I have a few things on my mind as I sit here deep in the heart of the EU-SSR, the European Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, where we are facing, here in France, an election this weekend. Emmanuel Macron, French president, is seeking re-election. The globalist favorite, up against so-called hard-right populists who apparently don't have a hope in heck of ever beating the golden boy favorite of the global elite. Except things are starting to gnaw away at his popularity in the last few days of this election campaign ahead of the first round of voting. Something you guys need to know about French elections. There are 2 rounds of voting. In the first round, there are several candidates, and all but 2 are eliminated in the first round. So this weekend coming up, all but 2 will be eliminated. And then in the second round of voting, which takes place 2 weeks later, that's when France decides who its next president is. And what happens is all the other voters for all the other candidates who are eliminated in the first round have to line up behind one of the 2 other remaining candidates. And it's heavily expected that the 2 candidates remaining in the second round will be Emmanuel Macron, globalist golden boy, and Marine Le Pen, populist evil witch, racist, everything you can throw, including the kitchen sink, against somebody who is otherwise described as populist. All of those things. And the big advantage, what's happening is the gap is tightening. It's within margin of error, according to some very serious French polls. Emmanuel Macron could potentially lose this election. And he'd really deserve it, frankly, because he didn't even really do a political campaign. His position up until just a few days ago, and I'm not even joking, he had his first rally a few days ago. His position up until then was, hey guys, you see what's going on in the world? I have COVID to deal with. I have the Ukraine crisis to deal with. I'm busy doing my job. I don't really have time to get down to the level of political campaigning and fight for re-election. I don't know if there's a position that could be any more arrogant than that. In the meantime, there's been some very interesting details coming out in the French press. as a result of a Senate investigation into the role of consulting firms like McKinsey and Company and various others, not just McKinsey, but that's the name that keeps coming out here in France. These globalist consulting firms whose executives spend a lot of time rubbing elbows at Davos, the World Economic Forum, who sponsor World Economic Forum and the activities, their program, just so happen to be cashing in big time with private consulting contracts under, of course, non-disclosure confidentiality agreements, because anything involving a private business contract falls under that, to advise the French government. And this has really exploded under French President Emmanuel Macron. Don't take my word for it. Take the word of a French Senate report that investigated this year. Because it came up during the pandemic that, well, one or more of these consulting firms was advising the French Ministry of Health and other government departments on the pandemic. And at first, they tried to say, oh, well, it was just basic stuff, logistics, that's all we were talking about. How do we know that? How do we know that all they were talking about with the government, all they were advising on was simple logistics? We'll never know, and it's not possible to know because, again, these are non-disclosure confidentiality agreements signed between the government and a private business. Good luck trying to dig into them. So let's imagine a scenario. I'm not saying it's the case. Let's just imagine a scenario. Let's just say that one of these consulting firms, global reach, all over the world, they have offices, rubbing elbows at Davos with Klaus Schwab, the inventor of the Great Reset concept and promoter of the new Great Narrative concept to promote the Great Reset concept. Let's just say that they have clients, a bunch of them. And among those clients, you have drug companies, multinational drug companies. And you have the governments. And we know that they have government clients. That's what's being investigated, not just in France, but in Canada as well. The opposition has called for an investigation into the role of these private consulting firms in terms of obtaining billions in France worth of government contracts, taxpayer money. So let's assume that, okay, they have government. We know they have governments as clients. We know they have multinational corporations as clients. Let's say drug manufacturers, vaccine manufacturers, technology companies. In that context, would it make sense that it would be of benefit to these consulting firms to promote things like multiple mandatory vaccine mandates, plus digital identification, and the integration of both of those things into a massive system that subsists and exists far beyond any particular pandemic or virus or whatever pretext that initially caused that system to be put in place? And then wouldn't it be profitable to sell that to another client, the government? I think what we have to look at is the influence that lies behind some of the policies that we've been seeing put in place in the West. I think our problem is that we are too quick generally. I'm not saying we, meaning the people watching the show, but I think our governments are far too quick to criticize other countries who don't align with their interests, while failing to acknowledge the kind of influence peddling that they've been allowing within their own governments and pretending that it's totally normal, nothing wrong with it, when it completely risks undermining and corrupting the very basic relationship between the citizens and the government and the direct influence that citizens should have on their own government without any interference from outside parties that have interests that are either financial or otherwise political, that have nothing to do with the basic interests of the people. Because that's how we end up where we are today, where I don't know what the gas price is where you guys are. I know some of you in the United States has probably been alleviated the situation because you guys are a bit more removed than we are here in Europe from all the nonsense that's been going on around the repeated rounds of sanctions against Russia under the pretext that we want to punish Russia for what's happening in Ukraine. So, knee-jerk reaction to absolutely everything. It's emotional. Understandably, war is emotional, but there has been very little effort to make sure that when sanctions are imposed that primarily impact on European citizens, when those sanctions are imposed by European governments, better make damn well sure that the pretext under which you're imposing those sanctions is 100% credible and justified. And it's arguable whether or not that's the case today. Everybody is just quick to jump on the sanction bandwagon. And like I said, for those of you joining me from Europe, how the gas prices where you are, we're more and more lunacy out of the European Union. To give you an idea, I'm going to actually give you a concrete example. All right. So we had another very interesting episode where high-ranking European official is saying absolute crazy nonsense, and it makes me wonder if somebody opened the doors of the insane asylum. Seriously. Okay. So Marguerite Vestager, the EU Commissioner for Competition and Executive Vice President of the European Commission, said at a Politico Live event, Politico being the American publication dealing with news and politics, she said last Wednesday, in relation to the energy shortage here in Europe as a result of the same brain surgeons running the EU deciding to impose sanctions on Russia and not understanding how that the EU cannot do without Russian gas for heating or for ethanol production to fuel our vehicles or for fuel production for industry in Europe. They just kind of blindly went, oh, emotional reaction, knee-jerk reaction, bam, sanctions, and then we'll deal with the fallout. We, meaning the people, will deal with the fallout. Okay, so this woman, this official, let's say, said, and I quote, "Control your own and your teenagers' showers. And when you turn off that water, you say, 'Take that, Putin.'" That's her advice to the average European citizen on how to deal with the absolute disaster of energy shortage and heated water related energy shortage that the EU has imposed on European citizens. Brilliant, right? We also had a very strange announcement again from Ursula von der Leyen, who is the European Commissioner and the President of the European Commission. I might get into that a little bit later, and I might play it for you directly because there's been some. She suggested another round of sanctions because, of course, we've recovered from these ones, right? We're back in the saddle now, so we can just keep imposing them willy-nilly without any regard to their impact on us. All because we must punish Vladimir Putin. So I'm getting some questions from some of you guys here about suggestions of war crimes in Ukraine. And some of you are suggesting, I'm looking at some of the comments that you're sending me. Thank you for sending them. By the way, if you're watching this live, you can send comments at any point to me and just on whatever platform you're watching the show, and I'll definitely get into it with you. So one of you said They don't want to investigate the Bucha massacre. Yeah, well, that's the latest quote unquote war crime. I don't have an answer to that for you. And I think that's the prudent approach. That's the conservative approach to this incident. We have images, we have accusations from both sides. We do not have um, a, a, a process by which a conclusion at which a conclusion has been arrived through credible investigation. And yet, we're throwing sanctions willy-nilly around, imposing another round of sanctions, assuming it's the Russians that did it. How many times have we jumped the gun in history? And I'm talking we in the West. How many times have we jumped the gun on these kinds of things because there's an emotional reaction? And then many months later, it comes out very quietly with almost no fanfare that what we witnessed, what we thought we knew, was not necessarily the truth. But nobody cares by then. And if there's damage to be done by imposing sanctions in a world that they have made sure is interdependent as a result of globalism, nothing happens in isolation. It's too late. We should have done a proper investigation earlier. And when I say proper, I mean not NGOs that are funded by special interests and billionaires with an axe to grind on one side or the other. I mean independent investigations with individuals whose job is to do that. I don't even know how that can be done anymore, frankly. I don't even know if it exists anymore, independent investigations. Seems like it's hard to come by. So I see here that we have Marc Ruskin, who's going to join me in 1 second. I see that his video is not activated, so we're doing this live, so I might try to get him to sort that out while I take him on air. And hopefully he'll be able to hear me and understand that his video needs activating. But if you guys have any questions for our guest, remember that as we get into this interview, you can send questions and I'll throw them up on the screen and we can answer them with our guest, okay? So this is going to be a discussion about influence. That's the big topic for today. So let's see if we can connect with Marc. Marc Ruskin, how are you? We can't see you. I hope we can hear you.
I can see you. Let me see why the
Yeah.
cameras.
Now we see the beginning of, we see an M on the screen, but we don't actually see you. And your microphone is a little bit low. You're live, just so you know.
Hold on.
So hopefully we can get that sorted out so we can actually see you. Unless you're doing this deliberately because you're a former member of the law enforcement and intelligence community, you're trying to maintain a mysterious profile, then I guess we can pardon that. It's not totally understandable.
Yeah, but that's not the intention right now.
Yeah, your volume is very low as well.
Okay, hold on.
So we're going to see if Marc can get his tech sorted out here. And
how about now? Let's see.
Yeah, if there's a way to boost your sound, that would be great.
I may have to switch microphone.
Yeah, that might be a good idea. Maybe a headset would be a good idea. In the meantime, I'm just, that sounds a bit better. Yes, better. Excellent. Perfect. Can you see me?
Yeah, I quit a second ago. Let me switch here. Hold on.
All right, so we're getting there. Bear with us. All right, so while we're setting up, Marc, I'm just going to tell everybody who you are. I was mentioning that the big theme today is influence and hidden influence and lobbying and all sorts of things going on behind the scenes that inform or that can inform us what's happening in Ukraine and other places in the world where we see conflict and where things are not necessarily what they seem. I am going to tell people a bit about you. Marc, you have just an amazing background. What people probably don't know, it's really interesting, is you are not only an American citizen, but you're a French citizen as well. You've done my French language show.
Right.
And yet you spent 20 years as an FBI special agent working in undercover operations. You were awarded 5 commendations from the director of the FBI. You're a graduate of Cardozo Law School, and before you served with the FBI, you were on the staff of U.S. Senator Daniel Moynihan as an assistant district attorney in Brooklyn. You've spent time in China. You write and study Mandarin, and you wrote a book. Yeah, we're getting a lot of feedback. And you wrote a book called The Pretender: My Life Undercover for the FBI, published by Thomas Dunn Books. So incredible background. And I think it looks like you're set up. You can still hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you see me?
Yeah, now your sound is bad. You need to turn it down a bit.
Jeez.
Yeah, no, or back away from. Yeah, that's better. I think that's okay. Yep. Yeah. It was just blaring, so it's better to turn it down.
What about audio,
That's
Rachel?
good. No, it's perfect. Perfect. All right. So, Marc, welcome to the show. It's great having you.
Likewise, it's great to
All
be
right.
here.
So I want to talk about a few different things. I want to talk about George Soros, the influence on the U.S. justice system. I want to talk about some investigations that are happening in the United States to get, let me just throw up this question because it was right about to come out of my mouth. We have a lot of people online watching right now who are really interested in, no, that was the wrong thing. We're getting a lot of feedback very quickly. Somebody said, don't touch anything anymore. I think it's good. I think your setup's fine. Yeah. All right. This
Yeah, I
viewer
can't
said,
see
Rachel,
anything.
please talk about Hunter Biden's laptop. We're dealing with an investigation into Hunter Biden's laptop. I mentioned that 50 former members of the intelligence community said a couple of years ago that that was a fictitious tale invented by some Russian trolls or some Russian entity to cause havoc for Joe Biden. And now we know that there is an investigation into a bunch of emails, and the laptop story is legit, that Hunter Biden has fingerprints all over Ukraine, that he was on. We knew already he was on the board of a big energy company that was under investigation for corruption called Burisma Holdings. In Ukraine. Who knows how he ended up on the board? We also know that he was a bunch of emails back and forth with people involved with biolabs in Ukraine, the nature of which are not entirely clear. We've heard various I guess, accounts of that. And yet the Department of Defense was involved. Now, we also know that Joe Biden, who seems to pretend that he's never really cared about Ukraine or had real deep interests in Ukraine until this particular conflict, that there was no involvement in Ukraine by him, despite the fact that he was vice president at the time that there was the Euromaidan event where the State Department was involved with that. We know that he was involved in, under the pretext of anti-corruption cleanup in Ukraine, involved in giving advice about a particular prosecutor in Ukraine and whether or not he should be there. What is going on, and why isn't all of this being investigated up to the highest level? This kind of interference in Ukraine by non-registered American entities in terms of lobbying registry.
Well, first, one thing I think it's worth pointing out is that the whole concept of characterizing this laptop a couple of years ago when the New York Post first came out with its expose, the idea of characterizing it as a disinformation, as part of a disinformation, and the oft repeated characterization was that it was part of a disinformation campaign. That could perhaps fool those in the media who don't understand how these things work from an operational point of view. But the ones who are really culpable in this characterization are the intelligence officers and former intelligence officers who signed off on the letter that so characterized it. And I'm talking in part Clapper and Brennan, and then all the others would have known from a professional point of view that it could not be part of a disinformation campaign. And the reason is that it was way too elaborate to be something that could have been created by others for the purposes of creating a fictitious or false impression. A disinformation campaign perhaps would involve creating a few dozen emails and then some other corroborating type of information. But in this case, in this laptop, you had a situation where you had thousands and thousands, I believe it was over 10,000 emails. So the idea that there's some people in the basement somewhere creating thousands and thousands of emails is just beyond credulity. It doesn't click. It doesn't make any sense at all. It couldn't, who would go through the trouble of creating, spending, how long could it take to create 10,000 emails and then say that they're all fictitious, and to make them in such a way that they can't be corroborated? It's just not possible. So that was a non-starter from the beginning.
Well, it's really interesting because the New York Post had a headline in October of 2020, so ahead of the last presidential election. It could have been the October surprise, theoretically, but I guess it wasn't. And the headline was, revealed Ukrainian exec thanked Hunter Biden for opportunity to meet Veep dad. And their headline was Biden's secret emails. And that was denounced as Russian disinformation. And the Post called it a smoking gun email that revealed how Hunter Biden introduced a Ukrainian businessman to his father, Joe Biden, when Joe Biden was vice president. And then they have a copy in the New York Post at the time, which has hardly been revisited. They have a copy of the actual email that they were able to get from this laptop, they claim. And it's from this Ukrainian businessman. It says, Dear Hunter, it's dated April 17th, 2015. It says, Dear Hunter, thank you for inviting me to DC and giving an opportunity to meet your father and spend some time together. It's really an honor and pleasure. As we spoke yesterday evening, it would be great to meet today for a quick coffee. What do you think? I could come to your office somewhere around noon or so before or on my way to the airport. Best. Now, Joe Biden said that he's denied any kind of involvement with his son's business or anything like that. But the concern should go beyond that. And in the context of today's conflict in Ukraine, where Joe Biden's words generally have people who follow the mainstream media believing that he never had any fingerprints on this, really, that this just fell into his lap, this issue in Ukraine with Russia. And yet we know that not only this has now been confirmed, but we have evidence that Hillary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State, was meeting with Ukrainian businessmen, even though she claims, and I believe this, that while she was Secretary of State, there were no donations from foreign governments to the Clinton Foundation. We do know for a fact that there are Ukrainian high-dollar donors that donated to the Clinton Foundation during her Secretary of State when she had fingerprints all over Euromaidan. So this goes to influence at the highest level. What can be done about that? I mean, this is symptomatic of a much larger problem, is it not?
Well, Oh, excuse me. I mean, I guess, I mean, there's a multitude of different issues that we're talking about here, because on the one hand, there's the foreign policy implications that you're talking about, and then there's the Justice Department issues, and the investigation and pursuit of of crimes, or potential crimes which would have violated American law. So, so one can arguably divide it into those two separate areas. One being looking at foreign policy implications, and one looking at implications from a justice point of view, and how or whether or not the justice system in the U.S. is going to function the way it's designed to function. So the wheels for this, from a judicial point of view, were set in motion by Attorney General Barr before he left office, and now we're beginning to see the results of a long-term, painstaking investigation which was conducted. But so I think it's kind of important to be able to draw a line and distinguish between those two areas, between the justice and foreign policy issues, and
Yeah, but
focus
but
on one.
we do know that the justice, one can inform the other, though. Like, what we're dealing with here is the instrumentalization of US foreign policy for potentially private benefit. And that's a crime, right? If it's proven.
Well, I think you have to articulate what activities you're talking about in terms of what crime. If there is a quid pro quo in order for political influence to be exercised in favor of one party over another in exchange for some kind of payment or other consideration, then you have the elements of serious crimes, of betrayal of the public trust, and of I mean, essentially, you would refer to it as bribery, and establishing a case against, investigating a case of bribery or public corruption really necessitates the appointment of a special counsel. The and we saw in the recent past that there was no hesitation in terms of appointing a special counsel, when there was certainly arguably much less in the way of justification. Here you have essentially hard evidence that certainly indicates that there's a possibility that there was uh, abuse of the public trust and abuse of public offers, and it's hard to it would be hard to argue that a special counsel would not be called for in this kind of a situation. And on top of which, what would be the rationale for not appointing a special counsel? What is the downside? You would think that uh, in an administration that wants to have the public confidence and wants to have the public trust and believes that it's innocent would do whatever they possibly could do to regain the trust. And if appointing a special counsel would be a step towards regaining the trust, you would think that that would be something that would be enthusiastically supported by all parties. Why not, especially if one's innocent, why not want to have one's name cleared and the name of one's family cleared in the most convincing way possible? And
But
it's
how
not going to be.
politicized is this? Like, there's theoretically what should happen if we're interested in getting to the bottom of it for the sake of the United States citizens, for example. But then there's the political reality of judicial selectivity and that kind of thing. Do you think that, let's just be honest, do you think that it's the State Department or the FBI is too politicized to investigate this,
But
knowing that
it's not a
Biden's
question.
president?
I mean, regardless of of you're talking about the two different issues here. The FBI would probably be investigating it regardless of whether it's the investigation is being spearheaded by the Justice Department or by a special counsel. So as we saw with the Mueller investigation, you had FBI investigators working on behalf of Mueller to uncover the evidence, and then the evidence at the end of the day seemed to be pretty objectively compiled, even though there were issues about upper management and how upper management uh, had not acted in a way that could be really characterized as objective. But the nuts and bolts agents who were conducting the investigation in the field, they're generally, in my experience, they're not the ones who are politicized.
Right.
They're trying to find the truth, and they're trying to uncover evidence, uncover facts. Now, whether or not the upper management is going to allow that to be uh, come to ultimately utilized, that's a separate issue. But I believe that the agents can conduct the agents themselves can conduct an objective investigation if they're allowed to do so and given a free rein, and if they're assigned to be working with a special counsel and not working directly for the Justice Department, as would ordinarily be the case in a situation where you did not have a conflict of interest. Here you have a potential conflict of interest, which is why you want an independent and objective special counsel that's acceptable to all sides, uh, and has credibility.
But do you think that there was more of an interest or more of a pursuit of the former president and his entourage than we're seeing today with respect to Joe Biden? It seems like there's just less of an appetite to go after any potential problematic issue around Joe Biden.
Let me ask you, just to get off topic for a second. Can you still see me? Because I'm
Yeah, we can see you. Somebody said you might want to turn your sound up a little. One of the viewers.
okay. I'm still trying. Please bear with me as we try and
Yeah,
get
it's
this.
okay. This is a new show. I had the same issues when I first started it, so we're slowly getting things sorted out.
Okay. It'll maybe just take a minute. I'm staring at a blank screen here.
Oh, we can see
The
you. We can see you though.
Okay. It's kind of bizarre here, but while I play
Maybe
with this.
if you just approach the screen a bit, it'll amplify the volume. That's probably, yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
So, I mean, like I said, do you think there's less of an appetite to pursue Biden's entourage as opposed to what we saw during Trump's mandate?
Hold on. Is this? This is
Everything's fine.
okay.
Yeah.
I think this is really at the early stages in terms. I mean, a lot's happened just in the last couple of weeks with regard to to the investigation and the laptop and its contents. And now we see that the beginning to becoming an acknowledgement that the laptop is a real laptop, and although so far there hasn't been much focus on its contents, the how aggressive the investigation is going to be is something that's going to be developed in the next couple of weeks or maybe a couple of months. We'll see as to whether or not it takes on a serious, more serious aspect. If there are indictments in the near future, which is not implausible at this point. It seems like a Delaware grand jury may be bringing indictments. Then it may be like a snowball, rolling down a hill, accumulating momentum, and then we may see a more serious, investigation, and then we'd be in a better position to really make a comparison as to whether whether it's being given the attention that it merits.
Yeah, because I remember during the Trump administration, there was a lot of talk. Well, there were charges against Paul Manafort, for example, Trump's former campaign manager, jail time, conviction regarding violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act with respect to influence peddling in terms of acting as a go-between between the U.S. administration or power or and the office of the president and or the appearance thereof, and foreign countries, high-level individuals, either close to power in foreign countries or that sort of thing. And we've seen Tom Barak charged with similar types of accusations with respect to the United Arab Emirates. There was all kinds of supposition, accusation, a whole cloud of problems regarding foreign influence peddling and the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the FCPA, during that Trump administration. And yet here we have evidence in the form of emails of the son of an individual who is now president, who at the time was the vice president of the United States, running around making promises to high-ranking, people in foreign countries. I don't know what qualifies as a foreign official in Ukraine. As we know, they have oligarchs, and oligarchs are often, I don't know if it's sufficient to be qualified as somebody who is indissociable from a government official. I don't know. It's kind of a murky area. I don't want to really get into the legal aspects of that because it's complicated. But it just seems as though there are some issues here that are really problematic, and we're not talking enough about it. I don't know. What do you think, Mark? By the way, we lost your video again. Hopefully we can still hear you.
I'm trying to. What about now?
That's good. Yeah.
So I mean, can you specify a little further what exactly the question is?
Yeah, what I was saying is that we saw during the Trump administration a lot of convictions or charges around the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the FCPA. And this incident with Hunter Biden running around Ukraine, sending emails to high-ranking Ukrainian businessmen. I don't know if that enters into the same category, but why do you think nobody's too concerned about it beyond a few people who are kind of speaking on the margin? It's not a big media issue in the States, is it?
The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, I worked a case. One of the long-term undercover cases I worked, and that's there's a chapter in my book about it. It was specifically having to do with violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the FCPA, and that would not necessarily be the correct statute to apply in this case. The FCPA basically involves corporations, which, let's say, American corporations, which would be paying bribes to foreign officials in order to obtain beneficial contracts or beneficial treatment. So, so if in the case where I worked, it was involved arms, it was and military supplies, and the allegations were that American and other arms manufacturers and dealers in military supplies were paying bribes to defense officials in foreign countries in order to get the contracts. So here you have almost a reverse situation where it's not the American corporation that, or business that's paying a bribe to a foreign official in a foreign country, but rather the allegations here are that the foreign officials are paying the bribes to to Americans in order to obtain American nationals in order to obtain favorable treatment, preferential treatment
Is that
from.
okay? I mean, are they allowed to do that? I suspect
No,
that's
they're not.
probably illegal.
No, no,
I hope.
they're not allowed to do it. I'm just splitting hairs, I guess, in terms of the what statutes are the ones that are involved.
It doesn't
But
sound too legal to me. I don't know. I mean, if I decide to do that tomorrow, I think I'd have probably more trouble than Hunter Biden while his father was vice president of the United States. I just suspect, you know. Mark, the other issue I want to get onto because it's also a big one. We hear a lot of talk, a lot of buzz around the January 6th events investigation. What do you think is going on at this point with regard to that? Is anything happening with that, or is it just a hammer that we keep using to bash the other party over the head without any real justification?
well, this again, I guess the common thread, the common theme in our discussions today really have to do with the application of justice and whether the application is being done in an even-handed an objective manner. Now, I guess we have a lot to be cynical about now about the application of justice. In this particular case, it seems that a a very wide net has been utilized to bring in a certain number of people who acted wrongly and acted in a bad way, in a terrible way, but the net has been so broad as it's ensnared people who were not acting apparently in as serious a manner. So you have people, and I wasn't there. I'm not an expert, but apparently you have different activities that were happening on the east side and the west side of the Capitol. And on one side, you had some serious wrongdoing and some serious damage. And on the other side, you had people who were oblivious, apparently, from what I've understand as to what was going on. And they're all being treated kind of with equal severity. And what's disturbing is that there are individuals who have been incarcerated, who have been imprisoned for over a year without having had an opportunity to post bail or to post bond and await the judicial process to turn in its slow manner, sometimes outside of a prison instead of behind prison walls. So uh, since they haven't had their day in court, there's really no way to know if uh, if they've acted in such a manner as to justify their being incarcerated. And then the issue becomes, is there a double standard here? Are people who uh, essentially just shortly months before that were acting uh, in a very violent manner and were not subsequently held in prison? While here you have apparently a lot of individuals who may or may not have been culpable of anything who are waiting in prison. And if they're found not to have acted in any kind of a culpable manner after being over a year awaiting a hearing in prison, no one's going to be able to give them that time back. It's
Hmm.
once it's gone, it's gone.
Where do you think they're headed with this? Do you think they're trying to flip a bunch of witnesses? It looks like a classic case of trying to start at the bottom and get to whoever was in charge at the top. And we've heard recently that there's 7 hours of one of the viewers just mentioned it, calls on that day in former President Donald Trump's logs at the White House that appear to be missing, and somebody said, like the Nixon tapes. I mean, is that useful rhetoric that we're hearing right now in the media around that? Do you have any idea as to what to make of that?
But what's the whole incident has been handled in what seems to be a hard to comprehend manner. The difficulty that was the journalists had in terms of obtaining videotape, CCTV tape of the incident, what was happening on that day, is curious. I mean, why would there be such a hesitancy to release tapes which are, clearly in the public interest to know of, on the building that could, is essentially the archetype for a public building. I mean, what building is more public in the interest than Congress to the general public? It's the people's house, really. And why was there such a hesitancy to release those tapes? And ultimately, they were in part released. So, there are a lot of questions as to procedure and as to to what extent has the have political considerations interfered with the administration of justice in what should be an objective and independent manner. So
now, at the very outset of this, right after January 6th, on that fateful day, we kept hearing about how this was an insurrection. We heard a lot of heated rhetoric about how it amounts to terrorism or an insurrection. Do we have anything to date to indicate that that is confirmed to be the case?
well, I guess the best answer at this point is to look at what individuals have been charged with, or what they've been accused of in terms of criminal complaints. So and I may not be completely up to date, but it appears that most of the charges so far have to do with trespass or aggravated trespass, or property damage, what's called on the state level criminal mischief, which is damage, essentially damaging property, and certainly an aggravated kind of criminal mischief.
We're far cry from terrorism, which is
Right,
what
but
was in the mouths of a lot of critics in the wake of this incident. There was a lot of hype and very heated emotional rhetoric.
Right. Well, there have been no charges. No one's been charged with, any crimes which would be associated with an insurrection, with an organized attempt to try and have some kind of change of government. Rather, like I said, they've been essentially either trespass or property crimes, which are the ones which have been which individuals have been accused of at this point. So they don't amount to
the hype. I don't know, Mark. Have we lost you? Your image has frozen. I think we may have. Let me just see if we can get Mark back here. I'm just going to try to bring him back on here. And that works because we have a connection issue. Yeah. I'm going to ask Mark to hear me because there is one more thing that I'll get to. Just hang on, guys. We're having an issue here. There's a technical issue at Mark's end. I can see that that the connection is poor. So, but I'm hoping he can reconnect with us. Yeah, I mean, I see some of you are writing me some comments You bring up valid points. It seems like there were insurgents. One of you is saying, Rakbas 1, thank you for your comments. Really appreciate some of your questions. Very interesting. But you bring up a good point. You say that it seems as though those insurgents were looking for Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, and they seemed ready to lynch her. Well, I don't know about that. I just know that it didn't look good. They had, I think, they had some kind of ties, like zip ties and things like that, which is a strange thing to bring to Congress, right? Marc, hi. I think we got you back. Thanks so much for connecting again. Look, there's one thing I want to ask you about. We're getting towards the end of the program, but what do you think of influence within, since the whole topic of this show is influence on various levels, covert influence, namely, and trying to pin it down, which can be complicated. Do you think there's undue influence from special interests within the American justice system itself?
Now, are you referring to like the criminal justice system and how it's been affected by recent over the recent years in terms of prosecutors and so forth?
Yeah.
'Cause I think that's an important issue to address. One of the things, and it's a really clever phenomena in a sense. If one wanted to undermine the criminal justice system, what better way to do it than to not by going after the law enforcement officers themselves, which would have been the logical, obvious way to do it, to go after the FBI or the police or the state police, but instead to go alter the intermediaries. So and by that what I mean, what's been done is there's been a deliberate and over the past few years campaign to get district attorneys elected or appointed who essentially do not have an anti-crime philosophy. So what you do is, and essentially you what they've done is emasculate the police forces, the law enforcement forces, because whatever they do, however well they conduct their investigations, they can have thorough, highly professional investigations and bring all the evidence necessary to bring criminals of all sorts, whether they be drug dealers or violent criminals, to justice. If one has inserted prosecutors who refuse to follow the law and enforce the laws and prosecute the individuals, then the whole criminal justice system becomes undone. And look at Los Angeles, look at San Francisco, look at New York City now, or Manhattan, I should say, and you see these prosecutors who have backgrounds that have nothing to do with law enforcement. They're not former assistant DAs. They're not former law enforcement officers. Rather, if anything, they're former defense attorneys. And what they're doing is creating policies where they don't enforce the law and they don't prosecute individuals who have committed serious and violent crimes. And the net result is going to be inevitably a continued increase in violent crime, continued disruption of public safety, loss of confidence by ordinary people in the justice system, and increasing disrespect for the criminal justice system by the criminals themselves, who know that they won't be prosecuted and won't even be held with bail or bond, awaiting a criminal justice procedure. So the irony is that you have, as we were referring to earlier, you have the January 6th individuals sitting in jail, not being allowed to post bond, and accused of, for the most part, if they're accused of anything, it's nonviolent crimes. Not all of them, but some of them. And on the other hand, now you have nationwide violent criminals who are being released because the judge's hands are tied by by laws which prevent them from setting bond or bail, and prosecutors who refuse to bring serious charges or who
Now,
bring misdemeanor charges for felony crimes.
are there special interests that result in those types of appointments? Is there some kind of impetus or force or lobby behind getting people such as those you've just cited into those positions?
Well, somebody's doing it. I mean, it's not just an accident or coincidence that you have these prosecutors. Mostly it's elected. For the most part, federal prosecutors are appointed. A U.S. attorney is appointed by the president. Normally, selecting from a list that's provided by others, including the attorney general and maybe senators from that particular state or representatives. But local prosecutors, district attorneys are elected. And so whoever is donating money to their campaigns, what is the interest behind that? Why would someone donate $1 million+ to the campaign of the Manhattan district attorney, who happens to be a former defense attorney and who has no interest in prosecuting criminal activity? That's a really good field of inquiry. I would suggest as to someone has an interest in creating anarchy and instability in our criminal justice system and in affecting the trust that the people have in the criminal justice system. Why? I know you've had other guests on your show that have speculated as to why, and I can imagine a lot of reasons, but none of them very good, or not very good for the public in general.
Yeah, I mean, it just always seems like when you scratch the surface on any one of these issues that seems puzzling, you generally come across some special interests of some kind who have a vested interest in that being the case, and they have an interest in pushing things in a certain direction. And again, it'd be interesting to know who or what. Often, when it comes to, for example, I can give you a really concrete example. Environmental protests in Canada. The Canadian intelligence services are well aware that there are special interests that fund NGOs, charities in the United States, and these special interests are anti-Canadian oil because they have investments in foreign oil operations, whether it be British BP, British Petroleum, or Saudi oil, and they have a vested interest in not seeing Canadian oil come into the US market, or not having Canadian pipelines developed that send Canadian fuel, Canadian energy down to the Gulf of Mexico. So as a result, they fund American NGOs that are environmentally oriented. Those NGOs in the US also support Canadian NGOs that are environmentally oriented and help mount protests against these pipelines. So there are hidden interests behind things like that. And again, it happens with so many different issues, including, I suspect, the one that you're talking about now. And I'm wondering if there's any evidence that you've come across in your research or experience that suggests that there are NGOs or charities or any kind of special interests like that behind that.
But one thing that I've learned, from 3 decades plus in the criminal justice system, both as a prosecutor myself here in New York, in Brooklyn, and as an agent in the FBI for nearly 3 decades, is that essentially whatever one can imagine someone else to be doing, someone's probably doing it. And it's sad to say that. I mean, it seems very cynical, but it's the stuff that people argue, the subject matter of conspiracy theories, but today's conspiracy theory very recently ends up being tomorrow's reality, unfortunately. So all of these things are certainly possible, and if they're possible, someone's doing it. If they can get away with it, they'll be doing it. That's why you need a strong and objective and independent law enforcement, and not only that, but a strong, independent, and objective media to write about these things. Because not so long ago, journalists, investigative journalists, would be publicizing this sort of activity after uncovering it and publicizing it.
Mm-hmm.
And without independent law enforcement and independent media, these things don't get exposed. They get swept under the rug, and this nightmare scenario that you're describing can go on without impediment.
Yeah, one of our viewers just suggested something interesting: George Soros and color revolutions. I mean, we know that there are various foundations that are financed by this billionaire philanthropist worldwide that seem to pop up far too often when it comes to chaos somewhere around the world, whether it's Antifa protests in France or various other activities. Do you think there's anything to that in the United States? Do you think there's any kind of influence from a particular individual or potential thereof in the U.S.?
Well, it's like I'm saying, if someone can get away with it, be it him or others like him or he and his friends, I don't know who it is, but they'll be doing it, and then the creation of fictitious justifications, duplicitous type of justifications is easy to do if you have a cooperative media and cooperative law enforcement. So if no one's going to bother to uncover the fact that your Green New Deal plan is actually something that allows you to get profitable oil deals in the Mideast or South America, then they're going to get away with it, and they'll continue doing it. So until we can bring back some integrity to the media and assure that we have objective and independent law enforcement on the highest levels, it's not gonna become known generally to the public, or it'll be ridiculed, as often is the case, by the media that seems all too eager to parrot what they're told, as opposed to providing their own independent and objective information.
Yeah, and that's getting increasingly difficult to do, because if you're an independent media entity and you attack a conventional narrative, you are totally susceptible to censorship, increasingly so. And we saw that with COVID. We saw that with climate change. We saw that during the Trump administration. If you dare to question the conventional narrative, that if you agree with Donald Trump, who generally did not promote the conventional narrative, even during his tenure. And now we're seeing that around the Ukraine conflict. It's very hard to get out a dissenting view in a way that is not directly attacked through either new legislation, through technological platforms that are beholden to governments that are increasingly interested in cracking down on dissent or debate, for that matter. And it's a challenge, honestly. And it doesn't serve democracy, I don't think.
Yeah, within the United States, the undermining of the First Amendment has been going on for the past couple of decades, and I have a real interest in constitutional law, and I really believe in the Bill of Rights as really being a cornerstone of our freedoms, and it's being altogether. We're seeing now, as you're aware, big tech, being utilized as a proxy by the government to silence speech, which is not supportive or in accord with the the line that they would like to see publicized. So you have a Twitter and YouTube and then different and Facebook. They all when you can have congresswomen and congressmen and senators have their accounts closed by these tech giants, it's pretty chilling. I mean, Tulsi Gabbard, who's a Democrat of all things, had her account. I don't know if it was closed or suspended by Twitter recently.
Yeah, and she also was shadow banned on Instagram, she says, and she may be a Democrat, but she does not adhere to the conventional narrative of majority. How do you say this? A conventional narrative of the establishment, let's say, within the United States, and she disturbs some people with her takes. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, I had my start in government working for Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was a Democrat, and he personified the concept of debate, of educated debate, exchange of ideas, and compromise, and that's how things worked 30 or 35 years ago, and that's how a democracy is supposed to work, and the whole concept now of expressing one's own ideas and exchanging ideas and listening to other ideas has been replaced by this concept of banning content which is categorized as being misinformation or disinformation.
Mm-hmm.
So once it's been characterized as Orwellian, now it can be banned, and then you have I don't have time to go into it now, but you have Herbert Marcuse's concept of repressive tolerance, when they say all speech should be free except speech which is bad, and then we decide what speech is bad.
Mm-hmm.
One just a very recent, perhaps one way that this can be fought is, and maybe it's too optimistic a way to look at it, but just in the past few days, it's become public knowledge that Elon Musk purchased 10% of interest in Twitter. So if you have other big players like him opposing the suppressors of speech by buying them out and then changing their policies, that could be one way to bring back some freedoms. If that's what he has in mind, that would be a positive development.
Yeah, I mean, I know that he's really big on free speech, and he said he would be censored at gunpoint, something to that effect on Twitter. I remember a comment that he made a few weeks ago. So we're pretty much at the end of the show, Mark. I just want to give you an opportunity. I have your book here, and The Pretender, My Life Undercover for the FBI, which people can purchase on Amazon or still pretty much everywhere. Can you, and you have a copy of it too. It's a gorgeous cover.
I just happen to have a copy here.
Yeah, because you happen to be right there at home, just sitting right next to the computer. Can you share with us a little tidbit from your book, a little taste? Because I'm sure some folks watching would be interested in checking it out.
Well, I mean, I think what is of interest to the general reader, I mean, the book is a memoir. Of the 27 years I worked in the FBI, 20 years I was an undercover agent. And there was two phases, one in the 90s and then one in the 2000s. And so the book is kind of a combination of recounting some of the more interesting undercover operations I worked, ranging from Italian mafia cases to Chinese heroin cases to white-collar Wall Street cases. So I worked a big variety of cases. And so part of the book are the cases themselves and the nuts and bolts of how an undercover operation actually functions, which kind of give the behind-the-scenes look. But the other thing which I think is of interest is that it also goes into detail about the FBI culture and of kind of what goes on behind the opaque windows of the FBI. You know, what's going on the inside in terms of how decisions are made, how people relate to each other, you know, what the power struggles are like. And it's the first time that an insider has written about FBI culture. There are others like, you know, there are journalists who have written books about FBI culture, you know, from the outside. You know, they interviewed a lot of agents, they and other employees. They did a lot of research, but this is the first-hand account that I'm aware of what it would really, you know, and an objective as objective as possible account of you know, the good and the bad, the positive and the negative. So I think at the very least, if you know, your readers look in Amazon, you can either type in my name or just the Pretender FBI and see if it's something that they find of interest.
So, what's the strangest or funkiest undercover character that you played in your career? I don't know if that's the correct
Yeah.
terminology, playing a character, but what was the funkiest persona that you adopted?
Well, you know, I had the opportunity to enter many different worlds and to, you know, and the range. You know, late in my career, I worked a series of what are called false flag operations, and those were
You
like,
made false flags?
there's a false flag operation is a type of undercover case where the undercover is pretending to be an intelligence officer from another country, usually a hostile country of some sort. So the way they're initiated generally is that an individual who has access to classified information. So often it's a military officer, sometimes it's like a scientist, a nuclear engineer, is looking to sell this classified information to a foreign power. And they reach out to a foreign power. And if the FBI finds out about it, they open a case, and someone like myself ends up approaching that individual, pretending to be a high-level intelligence officer from that country or another country that's involved, and then the investigation, where the relationship evolves to the point where I'm paying for the classified information, or for other. In one case, it was something. There's a chapter in the book where this individual wanted to sell materials which are used in the process to enrich uranium, to take regular uranium and make it into weapons grade uranium. And he wanted to sell that, and I ended up buying it from him for like $200,000. At which point he was arrested. But it's an interesting case. So from that being one extreme, where I was an intelligence officer in a number of maybe a dozen cases, to the other extreme, where I was the nephew of a Mexican cocaine cartel boss who was serving natural life in prison. And the case involved myself buying heroin from Chinese drug dealers under the orders of my uncle, so to speak, who, so I was posing as his nephew. And that also was a fascinating case for a couple of years, where we were purchasing heroin, but under really unusual circumstances, and with me, like I say, playing the role of a Mexican cartel boss's nephew. So
At any point, did you feel, oh man, the jig is up, I'm screwed, this guy's onto me?
yeah, no, I mean, there were some close calls in the course of my career, the including on one occasion, and we don't really have time to go into all the details, but on one occasion where I saw someone from a prior case who knew me under a different name and as a member of a totally different socioeconomic group, and it caused me to a little bit of perspiration, but I was able to extricate myself before he was able to see me. Luckily, I kind of had the drop on him, but there are situations where, with this kind of work where you have to think very fast, and the difference between making a wisecrack and saying the wrong thing can have a very different outcome at the end of the day, and it can cause for a very melancholy day if you don't pull it off correctly.
It's kind of like me doing this show right now. Marc Ruskin, author of The Pretender, My Life Undercover for the FBI. And you can buy that on Amazon or wherever you buy your books. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure, and we'll have to have you back soon. This is relatively new. We're still getting our footing, but we're having a blast so far, and we'd love to have you back.
Thank
Thanks
you,
again,
Rachel.
Marc.
Thank you for inviting me.
Take care.
Bye-bye now. Good luck.
All right. So everyone, so much for joining me. Thanks for your questions. You guys made me smile. Some of your questions are great, and your comments make me laugh too sometimes. So thank you for those moments of amusement. We'll be back again tomorrow. We're doing 3 shows again this week. I'm going to try to keep to 3 shows a week. Tomorrow we're going to be joined by a member of the European Parliament who is coming on